Are you merely a biological accident on a pale blue dot? This video pits Richard Dawkins, who views you as a gene survival machine, against Amit Goswami, who sees you as universal consciousness. Stay until the end to see these worldviews applied to your career and ethics. You'll walk away with a practical answer to the ultimate question. Given how the cosmos works, how should you live? If you are just a machine for your genes, what does that do to your sense of purpose? Dawkins begins with a brutal claim: your civilization only comes of age when it understands evolution, because Darwin finally let us answer why are people, without superstition. In Dawkins' view, all living things, including you, are built by genes that have survived in a competitive world for millions of years. They are like successful gangsters selected because they were ruthlessly good at surviving. From that, he argues that the fundamental unit of reality that matters for life's logic is not species, not groups, not even individual organisms, but genes, replicators that persist by being copied. Bodies like yours are temporary survival machines, disposable vehicles that genes build to improve their odds of getting into the next generation's sperm or eggs. Genes are immortal, in the sense that copies of a successful gene can last for millions of years, whereas any single body disappears after a few decades. In this framework, selfishness and altruism are not about your motives. They're about whether a behavior increases or decreases your survival and reproduction compared with others. Dawkins shows how apparently altruistic acts like birds giving alarm calls or bees dying when they sting can still be explained as strategies by which genes increase the survival of copies of themselves in relatives. He dismantles the comforting idea that animals, including humans, evolved for the good of the species, and he shows how group selection stories we sacrifice for the species fall apart once you track which genes actually spread. Applied to your life, Dawkins' methodology says this: if you want to understand where you fit in the cosmos, you must start from biology. You are a product of selfish genes that happened under certain conditions to create cooperation when it helps those genes spread through kin, reciprocity, and stable strategies like tit for tat in repeated interactions. So when you feel love, loyalty, or outrage at cheating, those feelings are not cosmic messages, they are byproducts of gene-level strategies that made your ancestors more likely to pass on DNA. The practical takeaway in Dawkins' frame is cold but clear: you should stop expecting nature to care about your meaning. If you want a meaningful cooperative society, you cannot assume biology will push you there. You have to consciously rebel against your genes' designs through culture and ethics, because we alone on Earth can say no to our biological masters because we are born selfish. The wrong way to see things would be the following: you feel purposeless, so you tell yourself evolution must have intended humans to be kind and enlightened, and you expect people to become naturally selfless if they just follow nature. In Dawkins' logic, this is a mistake. Your expectation collapses when you see predators, exploitation, and conflict built into evolved strategies. You become disillusioned and cynical because the world does not match your story. The right way is this next approach. You accept that nature is red in tooth and claw at the gene level. You design your work, your relationships, and your institutions with the assumption that people have built-in tendencies towards self-interest, nepotism, and subtle cheating, but also a capacity for cooperation when incentives reward it. You push for transparency, repeated interactions, and live and let live systems like the World War I trench truces, where mutual restraint emerged because both sides faced a long shadow of the future. The result is you suffer fewer naive betrayals and you build more robust, realistic forms of cooperation. Now compare that to what happens if you take Goswami's starting point instead. What if your feeling that you don't fit in a dead mechanical universe is actually evidence that the universe itself is not dead or mechanical? Goswami starts from the opposite direction. He takes quantum physics to mean that matter cannot exist in a fully definite way without observation, so the most basic stuff is not matter but consciousness. In his reading, quantum objects exist as potential possibility waves in a transcendent domain until they're collapsed into concrete events by consciousness. This is his modern version of an idealist metaphysics. He uses famous quantum scenarios to build the case. In the double-slit experiment, an electron behaves like a spread-out probability wave when you do not look, but like a localized particle when you detect which slit it goes through. Which behavior you see depends on how you choose to observe. In delayed choice experiments, the setup can be changed after the photon has already passed a beam splitter, yet the outcome still lines up with your final choice of measurement, as if the decision about what the photon was only becomes real at observation. Goswami takes these as signs that the underlying reality is not a fixed material world, but a domain of possibilities in consciousness. From that, he proposes a monistic idealism. There is one universal consciousness, and physical objects, including your brain, are manifestations within it, not the other way around. He rejects the view that your mind is just software running on a neural hardware. Instead, he models the brain as a strange hybrid classical quantum system where non-local consciousness collapses quantum brain states to produce specific experiences. The conscious I is not produced by neurons. It is the universal subject identifying with a particular tangled hierarchy of brain processes. Practically, this changes your place in the cosmos. You are not an accidental side effect of blind matter. You are a localized center of awareness through which the universe knows itself. Your feelings of separateness, anxiety, and not fitting are, in this account, effects of a mistaken identification with the ego, the classical conditioned self that emerges from habits of memory, and a rediscovering of the quantum self, the Atman, the awareness that precedes the ego and is continuous with universal consciousness. The wrong way example in Goswami frame could be the following. You hear that consciousness creates reality and use it to justify magical thinking. You assume that merely wishing will override all constraints, ignore empirical evidence, or let you skip effort. You blame yourself whenever outcomes do not match your desires, and you drift into guilt or denial rather than understanding how choice, probability, and physical constraints interact. The right way instead would be you treating quantum collapse as a model of how possibilities become actual. You accept that at each moment your awareness has a real role in which inner state becomes your lived experience, especially in how you interpret events and what intentions you reinforce. You work to loosen rigid ego patterns, automatic narratives of I am this limited person who must protect myself, and you train attention toward more expansive contexts, compassion, curiosity, and service. Over time, your sense of isolation softens. You experience more moments where the boundary between you and the world feels thin, like Blake's doors of perception opening. Goswami then extends this to ethics and development. He describes multiple bands of self-identity, from ego-centered levels obsessed with personal gain and shadow conflicts, up through buddhi levels that focus on creativity, service, and spiritual joy, and finally to Atman, where the sense of separate self dissolves into unity of consciousness. In this map, your feeling that you don't know where you fit in the cosmos is not a pathology. It is a developmental signal that your ego-centered identity is too small for the experiences you are having. Faced with the same decision, what to do with your one life, Dawkins and Goswami tell you very different best moves. Which one actually helps you act? Let's put you in a concrete situation. You are choosing a career path and ethical stance in a competitive field. You feel torn between maximizing personal advantage, doing something socially meaningful, and honoring your own need for inner coherence. If you adopt Dawkins' methodology, you start by assuming that almost all altruism can be traced to gene-level benefits or cultural strategies that ride on them. You look at workplace cooperation the way he looks at vampire bats sharing blood, or soldiers establishing live and let live truces. You ask, where are their repeated interactions? Where does playing nice but retaliatory, tit for tat, beat naive self-sacrifice or pure exploitation? The way to do this wrong is ignoring the gene-level logic and betting on innate goodness in high-stakes, one-off interactions where there is no accountability. You give away credit, overlook cheating, or sacrifice your interests when there is no shadow of the future, no ongoing relationship, no reputation at stake. The result is you burn out, feel used, and drift into bitterness about human nature. Instead, you should deliberately construct your career and relationships as iterated games. You work where reputation, long-term collaboration, and reciprocity matter. You start out cooperative, you reciprocate kindness, and you firmly retaliate against systematic exploitation, just like tit-for-tat strategies that thrive in iterated prisoners' dilemmas. You do not romanticize your own motives. You see that your drive for status and security is biologically grounded, and you channel it into socially constructive competition, innovation, reliability, and honest signaling. You end up with a realistic, earned sense of belonging. You fit in the cosmos as an evolved cooperator who chooses to build decency on top of amoral biology, fully aware that the universe itself is indifferent. Now take the same situation through Goswami's method. Here, you start from the idea that your deepest identity is not your competitive ego, but your quantum self. The discomfort you feel when acting purely opportunistically is not just social conditioning, it is a misalignment between your actions and the wider field of consciousness you actually are. The way to fail in applying this, using "we are all one" as an excuse to avoid clear boundaries, feedback, or consequences. You stay in exploitative setups because you tell yourself it's all consciousness anyway, which lets other people's more aggressive egos dominate you. You feel increasingly dissociated. Your language becomes spiritual, but your life feels more and more out of integrity. Instead, do it right and treat your career choice as a macro-scale reflection of quantum collapse occurring within your own mind. Each decision, what you say yes to, what you say no to, collapses a certain probability cloud of who you can become. You pay close attention to which choices expand your sense of meaning, connectedness, and creativity, and which choices tighten your ego's grip through fear or greed. You deliberately cultivate practices that increase your access to the Buddhi level reflection meditation service, so that your actions are less driven by old conditioning and more by spontaneous appropriateness. You still navigate competition, but you hold your identity lightly, seeing yourself as an agent through which universal consciousness explores and serves, not just as a gene vehicle hoarding advantage. The result is a different kind of fit. In Dawkins' picture, you fit because you understand your place in a gene-driven system, and you design strategies accordingly. In Goswami's, you fit because you recognize that the cosmos itself is conscious, and your job is to participate in its unfolding with as much freedom and love as you can embody. Do you really have to choose between being a disillusioned gene machine and a mystic who ignores biology? Or can we build a third way, a framework that respects the data of biology and the depth of experience? If the end conclusion must be yours, here is a logical way to combine the two. From Dawkins, you take the warning that nature does not guarantee kindness, fairness, or meaning. You accept that your brain has been shaped by genes that promote survival, even if that means bias, tribalism, or cruelty under some conditions. So you design your environment and your habits as if you were managing a powerful but amoral animal, your own evolved psychology. You assume you are capable of selfishness and rationalization, and you build in accountability, repeated games, and cultural norms that reward cooperation. This keeps you from sentimental naivety. From Goswami, you take the claim that consciousness is not reducible to that animal, and that your experience of value, beauty, and unity is not a meaningless hallucination. You treat those experiences as data about a deeper level of reality, the transcendent potentia in which all physical events are rooted. You accept that your choices of attention and intention shape which possibilities become real in your life, especially at the level of meaning and identity. This keeps you from nihilism. A sort of wrong-way hybrid would be to cherry-pick whatever is convenient, using Dawkins to justify selfish grabs, it's just my genes, and Goswami to justify magical entitlement, the universe will provide because I'm manifesting. You end up with the worst of both worlds, cynical when others suffer, and disappointed when your wishes do not override reality. The right way is letting Dawkins set your expectations about how complex adaptive systems behave, organisms, markets, institutions, and you let Goswami set your expectations about the significance of consciousness and inner development. You see your ego as an evolved pattern that needs to be understood and disciplined, but not as your deepest self, You work in the world as if strategies and incentives matter, and you work in yourself as if awareness and intention matter. In this combined stance, the pain point, I don't know where I fit in the cosmos, becomes less paralyzing. You fit at one level as a late arriving temporary survival machine in a 13 billion-year-old evolutionary game. At another level, you fit as a unique center of the universe's own consciousness, exploring what it can be through you. Your task is not to pick one story and discard the other, but to act in a way that is lucid about biology and faithful to your deepest experiences of meaning. In a universe of selfish genes, your meaning is something you must build. In a universe of self-aware consciousness, your meaning is something you must recall.